Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fortifying Your Faith. I'm Haston Hanley, your host, and I'm so glad you can be back with us today, as we are going to be continuing studying through the idea of needing to grow in our spiritual lives. We will actually be marking the end of studying this passage, 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 7, and in this, we're actually going to be shifting into our next passage that we're going to be discussing. And in that, I want us to spend just a few minutes also in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, as today we are going to be looking at the last virtue to grow in, but also the first fruit of the Spirit, and that is love. And really figuring out and discussing how to actually grow in love. Last week we looked at growing in brotherly kindness or brotherly love, and we saw how that actually looks. And even though sometimes it's difficult, we saw that it is very beneficial, because if we wish to be called Christians, if we wish to embody the mentality of Christ, then we need to have that brotherly love. This week, however, as we look at love in general, I want us to remember just a few passages before we ever begin. I want us to start out with Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10. Because Paul is writing to these brethren in Galatia, and he says, And as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, and especially unto those of the household of faith. You see, as we live our life as Christians, we can't just show partiality only to Christians. We can't just show love and respect and adoration only towards Christians. We are to be showing goodness, love, and kindness towards all men. We should seek to do good towards all mankind, and not just to those as Christians. So what does it look like for us as Christians to live a life of love? Well, I want us to go to perhaps the most commonly discussed passage on love, and that's 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Because as Paul is writing this, he's writing to a very divided congregation. He's writing to a group of people who have been pulling apart at the seams, and every possible way they could be divided, they were striving to be divided. And so he would write, Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love, I have become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understanding all mysteries, and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and I have no love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not love, it profits me nothing. All three verses of this, all of these different things that he's discussing are areas where they were seeking to be divided. They were trying to say, well, I can speak in tongues, but they weren't loving their brother. They weren't showing the love of Christ, and they were just making noise. Others were prophesying and understanding all of these things, but they just didn't have love. They weren't doing anything. Those who were giving out of their excess, those who were giving everything that they had, if they weren't giving it out of love, but rather the thought of, hey, everyone look at me, they weren't being benefited anything spiritually. And so, within this, Paul is telling them love suffers long. Love is kind. It doesn't envy. It doesn't build itself up, and it's not puffed up. It doesn't behave itself unseemly. It doesn't seek her own. It's not easily provoked. It doesn't think any evil. It doesn't rejoice in iniquity, but rather in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. You see, as Paul is writing this, he's writing to a people who are lacking love. But for us today, what does this look like? If somebody disagrees with our viewpoint on the Bible, if someone disagrees with our viewpoint on politics or on anything else, are we acting and behaving out of love? Because as Christians, we are supposed to not only embody the love that God has shown towards all mankind, but we're also supposed to embody the love of a Christian, the love of Christ, and all of these different things. When people look at us, do they see a Christian love? You see, within each one of these verses, we're given direct ways that we can grow our love. Maybe we need to have a more selfless love. Maybe we need to have a more pure love in that we're not envying something. Maybe we're not having a patient love. Maybe our love has a short fuse or a temper. Maybe it's one that's constantly thinking evil of other people, thinking evil of other ideas or anything else, and not actually loving the soul. Maybe we've gotten so far away from actually living a loving life that we are constantly showing hatred. Because we go right into our next group of characteristics to grow in. Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. Paul says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law." And when we look at these things, we have to ask ourselves, are we actually growing and showing and being productive as Christians if we don't have love? Because the number one product of the Spirit is love. Why is it that we as Christians have gotten a title and have gotten the reputation that we are not loving people? Well, simply put, it's because we haven't been. We haven't been loving, we haven't been caring, we haven't been kind. So when we look at ourselves and examine ourselves, when we try and grow and seek a way to grow, why not look at the characteristic of love? Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is our 8th lesson so far, our 7th characteristic, as we don't really count the need to grow as a characteristic of growth. But there are so many more areas, but I don't want us to get hung up on the fact that this is just kind of in the middle of the season. This needs to be the cornerstone of the growth that we have. Yes, we need to have faith and knowledge to grow. Yes, we need to exercise self-control and patience. Yes, we need to embody the godliness that we are learning about. Yes, we need to show forth brotherly love, but through all of this, it ought to be an example and a display of love in general. Because if we don't love God, well, first of all, we don't know God. We don't have the proper faith that we ought to have. If we don't love ourselves, if we don't love God, then we won't have self-control. If we don't love our neighbor, then we won't have patience. If we don't love God, once again, and we don't want to emulate and follow after God, we won't follow after godliness. If we don't love God, then we can't love our brother. And so you see how love is the major cornerstone. Now, yes, there needs to be truth. Yes, there needs to be a confrontation to a certain extent of you need to fix the error in your life. But we ought to be doing that and should be doing that out of a heart of love and not a heart of vengeance or hate or anything like that. So next week, I want us to be focusing, well, I guess throughout the rest of this week, on love. And so that way we can seek to grow closer to God, grow in that characteristic of God, and start looking forward to these fruits of the Spirit as we begin next week discussing joy, Lord willing. But until then, let's continue studying, let's continue growing so that we can all fortify our faith.